Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Nandoskar, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawaii Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the 6th and final lecture of the 34th Annual Experts at the Cathedral Lecture Series. Mahalo to our event partner. I apologize for the background noise. Mahalo to our event partner, Dr. Ralph Kam, the curator and coordinator of the Expert Series on behalf of the Historic Preservation Program, Department of American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. HHF is greatly pleased to co-sponsor this year's Experts, which explores the changing interpretations of national historic landmarks. Before we begin, a few virtual housekeeping items. We are recording today's presentation. We're also live streaming on the HHF Facebook and YouTube pages. The presentation will be available on those pages immediately afterwards and on our HHF website event page within a few days. Please type any questions throughout the presentation that you have in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can in the Q&A session after the formal presentation. For those new to Historic Hawaii Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places, sites that tell the stories of the multi-layered history of Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. We have a real treat today. We have 3 presenters, and I'd like to warmly welcome them. We have Lisa Chow, Elizabeth Beth Pooloa, and Elizabeth Lentz-Hill. They are executive team members of Hawaiian Mission House's Historic Site and Archives and Director of Administration and Finance, Operations and Collections and Development, respectively. They will present on the history and changing interpretations of Kawaiaha Church and Mission Houses in Honolulu, Oahu, designated on December 29, 1962. Briefly, I just would like to share a little bit about each. Lisa Chow has an MA in English and BA in Communications with a focus in Hawaiian and Pacific literature. Along with teaching at Leeward Community College and Chaminade University, Lisa has worked in the development department at Hawaiian Mission Houses for 3 years, continuing her work as the lead grant writer, as well as streamlining, management systems and monitoring budgets. Lisa resides in Kailua with her 6 children and 6 mo'opuna. Elizabeth Beth Po'oloa has a master's degree in the history of art and architecture and a certificate in museum studies from the School of Allied Arts and Architecture at the University of Oregon. She was curator of collections at Hawaiian Mission Houses since 2016, and her role expanded to include site facilities operations in 2019 and executive leadership in 2020. From 2012 to 2016, she served as the lending collection manager at the Honolulu Museum of Art, where she cared for more than 4,000 artifacts and 6,000 two-dimensional art reproductions available for loan to educators within the state. Beth is also a former board member of the Hawaii Museums Association. And we have Elizabeth Lentz-Hill, who grew up in Kailua before moving to the continent in high school. She attended Carleton College and became a professional contemporary dancer, performing and teaching in France, Mexico, Brazil, and across the US for over 20 years. As a nonprofit administrator, also during this time, she founded 2 regional dance festivals and directed projects that garnered funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as state and local funders, and most recently, as interim chair of both the dance and theater departments at the University of Southern Mississippi outside of New Orleans. Elizabeth moved home to Hawaii in 2018 and joined the Hawaiian Mission Houses staff soon after. She's enjoyed sharing the innovative programming and research being done at Hawaiian Mission Houses with as many people as she possibly can. Welcome, Lisa, Beth, and Elizabeth. Lisa, you can turn on your camera and your video.
Aloha kako. I'm Lisa from Hawaiian Mission Houses. I'll start our panel presentation. So yes, I started at Hawaiian Mission Houses in 2017 as in development under Marianne Lind, who I consider my mentor in the museum world. As part of Hawaiian Mission Houses, Beth, can you go to the next slide? One of the things that I always like to start with is that Hawaiian Mission Houses Historic Site and Archives is a National Historic Landmark accredited by the Hawaiian American Alliance of Museums. Hawaiian Mission Houses is the parent company of our 501(c) not-for-profit organization is the Hawaiian Mission Children's Society, and it was founded in 1852, and it has no religious affiliation. And one of the main things that I think people know us for is that we care for the two oldest still standing houses and the Protestant Missionary Cemetery. This site was the headquarters for the American Protestant Sandwich Island Mission, established here in 1820 and was ended in 1863. So as part of what we care for as far as our collections, we have over 7,500 artifacts, including furniture, quilts, bark cloth, paintings. The bark cloth would be kapa, paintings, ceramics, clothing, and jewelry. We also have the archival collection that includes more than 12,000 books, manuscripts, original letters, diaries, journals, illustrations, and Hawaiian church records. HMH Hawaiian Mission Houses cares for one of the largest collections of Hawaiian language books in the world and the second largest collection of letters written by the ali'i. And the size and scope of these collections make Hawaiian Mission Houses one of the foremost repositories of the 19th century Hawaiian history. In fact, we believe that if anybody is doing writing about Hawaiian history, that our archive is one that needs to be visited and learned about. One of the things that we revisited in probably 2018-19 under Executive Director Neil Hitch was a way to stay relevant within our community, as well as to really focus on what this place would have been like in the 19th century. And for myself as a Kanaka Maoli, and knowing that my ancestors were at one time on Maui were baptized Protestant and were very much connected in the missionary world, I asserted that we didn't hear my ancestors' voices, and so we looked at this and the archives and some of the material that we were looking at, and thought that the best way to better serve our community was to create exhibits that with the theme of 1,000 narratives. Not that we were going to interpret them, but we were going to present them. We went to Hawaii Tourism Authority and wrote a grant to help us with the expansion of this. And one of the most important aspects of this was bringing the language back onto the site, Olelo Hawaii. And to give you a little bit more of how we initiated that part, we have a short video of created by HTA that summarizes that particular aspect of the tours that we were expanding. I'm not sure if we can hear the video.
We need to hear the sound through the computer, Beth. And I would recommend you start from the beginning.
Should I turn mine sound off? And Elizabeth, or Beth, you need to turn your sound on.
Apologies. Yep, I was on mute, so it wasn't hearing it. I'll start it one more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hawaiian Mission House's Historic Site and Archives is to interpret the stories of the 1800s when the mission. So the vision of the Hawaiian Mission House's Historic Site and Archives is to interpret the stories of the 1800s when the missionaries first came here in 1820. What Hawaii Tourism Authority has allowed us to do is look at the narratives of multiple people who interacted on this site, which is not only the missionaries, but my ancestors.
Ayakako makulumi o na ohana Judd.
We have a story Reverend Green told about him introducing the loom to young Native Hawaiian girls that he was teaching. And so that would be one narrative. Another narrative would be those young Hawaiian women talking about this foreigner missionary who introduces this loom and asking them to work on it in the mid-afternoon.
Gives an opportunity to shift the lens of how this space had been represented.
So as much as this is the mission houses and the home of all of these missionary descendants, I think what all of this is really about is showing that Hawaiians were constantly within the space.
In writing the tour, that's actually kind of what I think we're both hoping for, is to create a dialogue with community members, having people go through the tours, but having people say, oh, well, you know, I heard or learned about this space, or my family in this space, or maybe, oh, that is my ancestor and I didn't know that they were in this space, is something that I think we're hoping to do to create a sense of community and communal learning.
It is extremely important to bring the language back to this site. You look at the missionaries' journals, they were written in Olala Hawaii, they were speaking Olala Hawaii, and they were teaching in Olala Hawaii. That language should be dominant again here in this space.
Thanks to this HTA grant, we're really able to speak to a very different audience that now is excited and ready to hear about how a place like this is relevant to them. With Hawaiian language, we know that we're at a capacity now in having enough speakers and enough learners that they're looking for Hawaiian in any environment that they can feel welcome to. And it's really exciting that the mission houses and HTA can kind of collaborate on this project, where we can open up another space and have these really amazing discussions, and that they can see that this is a place where they can feel comfortable too.
This is no longer just one narrative, it's a multiple narrative, which is a space that is being, the Hawaiian story is being told. Our ancestors' story is being told.
Thanks. And so that was that HTA presented that particular video into their organization. That the story that I talked about with Reverend Green was the thing that I kind of started my initial interest in this, because it didn't really give an exact what I was thinking, is that when the girls were asked to sit in the hot sun in his yard, all of their friends were going out surfing, or they were working in the pineapple fields and the sugar fields to help with the income for their families. And so that particular story was being overlooked. It was kind of the narrative that these young women didn't want to work in and do women are things that they should have been doing as according to the missionaries. And so at any rate, we were able to launch this program and do our tours that are offered both in Olala Hawaii and English from the Native Hawaiian perspective. We're also building the Halepili, and there was one particular day that I'd like to share that I went out into and was talking to Uncle Earl, who was speaking Olala Hawaii to a few of the people there. And as I walked into to our building, we had our script writer who was writing historical portrayals, who were speaking to some of the actors, and they were speaking in Olala Hawaii. And then I walked into the library, and all of the researchers and transcribers were also speaking Olala Hawaii. And that was the main goal that I was looking for. And so as we here, sorry, get disconnected. And so as we moved on, in 2020 came, we needed to keep on to our theme. And one of the, we were now moving into the school programs, and considering the population that perhaps that we weren't able to serve, and that was the immersion schools. And so that was part of the aspect that we were working on. And then we were hit, of course, with the pandemic. We were shut down, and we started to write grants. But we wanted to make sure that our focus stayed the same with what we were writing for. And it was, we were really lucky to receive NEH, National Endowment of Humanities, that helped us create a school, to take our school program and convert it to a digital program, and at the same time create and expand our narrative and recreate our curriculum. And so with that, I think I'm gonna go ahead and turn over the time to my fellow executive team, and Elizabeth and Beth will expand that particular story.
Okay. Aloha. I am Elizabeth, and I go by Beth because we do have two Elizabeths on the executive team. So aloha, everybody. Elizabeth Pooloa, the Director of Operations and Collections at Hawaiian Mission Houses. And I am honored to be working on this executive team and for Hawaiian Mission Houses, and honored to be here talking about the ways that HMH is expanding its narrative to be more inclusive and representative of the community that it reflects. I'd also like to acknowledge that my personal background and ancestry is from California. Though my family here in Hawaii is Hawaiian, I am a guest in this community, and I hope to always be a good one, always be a good guest by continuing to work to serve it. And I'm happy to be working for a service-based nonprofit in the arts to do that here. I'm very happy with the progress that HMH has made in recent years to address uncomfortable aspects of 19th century history in Hawaii, and also to expand the narratives and to be more representative. And I think that by bringing a lot of these things to light, we get a more accurate picture of the 19th century in Hawaii, and a more accurate interpretation through our site in our tours and programs. One huge way that HMH has changed in recent years, and I think you may, many people who are here on Oahu may have seen the new hale pili that has been going up on King Street. So we added a hale pili onto the National Historic Landmark. It's sort of a big deal to add a building onto a National Historic Landmark, but it went up in the last 2 years. The project was in development for over 10 years and was the brainchild of preservation architect Spencer Leineweber and Director Emeritus Tom Woods. It was intended to actually be completed in 2015, and for a variety of circumstances, the project was handed to me in January of 2019, and at which point there was only a cement slab and at the beginning of a frame. The hale was blessed just this January 22nd. So over the last 2 years, I've been working with architect Dwight Kawaiaha and Kamehameha School's cultural specialist, Earl Kava'a. and the vocational training nonprofit Kawaiaha. And the site in these last 2 years has been tangibly lifted by their presence and their expertise in traditional Hale architecture, and also how to carry forward these concepts into the present day Hale on our grounds and the programs and educational components that will accompany it. It's extremely important to have a Hale Pili on the grounds of Hawaiian mission houses because when the missionaries arrived in 1820, their first housing was Hale Pili. It was the dominant style of architecture in early 19th century Honolulu. So it's the most representative style of architecture for the time that we interpret on our site. There were some Western style houses that existed in Honolulu and on Oahu at this time. Actually in all of Hawaii, there were a few Western style buildings. They no longer exist. So it makes the building on our site at Hawaiian Mission Houses, the 1821 frame house, the oldest still standing Western style building that still stands in Hawaii. Before the construction of the 1821 house, Governor Boki, who was an important figure of the time in Honolulu and much like a director of public works, began constructing Hale Pili for the missionaries about 3 months after their arrival on the order of King Liholiho. The image that is shown on the screen now is what would later be known as Missionary Row. It was a compound of Hale that was built by Governor Boki. And if you can imagine this stretch of Hale situated about where the current Hale Pili is, in the front yard of mission houses and stretching through Kawaiaha Plaza, almost to the edge of Hawaiian dredging across the street there. And you can see here, you can see this layout. We have a few Hale 1, 2, and 3, which were Hale Noa or Hale Mua for sleeping, one for the Binghams, one for the Loomises, and one for the Daniel Chamberlain family. And they're connected by this long shared space lanai in front. And then there's a small cookhouse here. There was also a storehouse, and then it began with with another Hale off to the side, and then more Hale were added into this compound as time went on. It's interesting too, we do have this really cool pencil sketch by George Holmes from 1821 that shows the side of one of the Hale with the Bingham's Hale actually with the side removed, so we could see how they inhabited the interior space there. We also have a description from the Thaddeus Journal, which says Mr. Ruggles and Captain Chamberlain fitted up the schoolroom for school meetings and for school and meetings, which is church services, hanging the walls and covering the ground with mats and making commodious seats. We felt the need of lumber, an article most difficult to be obtained here. It would hardly be possible at any price to purchase a sufficient quantity of plank for seats for this public room. Some of the timber brought with us will answer very well for temporary seats, placed around the room double and covered with hay and mats. So this is an interesting example of this early contact period between the missionaries and their Hawaiian community, in which they're reconciling the needs of what the Western expectation and needs of having architecture and having interior education and spiritual learning space with the existing tradition of Hale building. So you can see here that what they've done is literally split the space, and the Binghams were sleeping on one side here, and they used the other side for their education space or for a space to congregate. So there's a interesting meeting of ideologies that exists in the artifacts of the buildings themselves. And so are expanding our use of the architecture to reflect how these ideologies were coming together, and as avenues for inquiry on you know, how these reconciliations were taking place in this early contact period. So here is the newly blessed hale, complete with doors and windows and fireproof hale pili shingles and flashing, and a coral block wall that much of this coral block here that you see on the used for the landscaping was actually from a pile in about a quarter mile away at Kawaiaha Church. And they graciously let us have some of these smaller pieces that really weren't serving a use over there. And this huge slab, which has a fun story of being walked down the street by the OPO of Kawaiaha. And this hale, as I touched on, sits in roughly the same area that Missionary Row existed, and is a reminder that to all that are passing along King Street, that although Western style buildings became more and more dominant in the 19th century, the majority of the mission compound structures were hale pili as late as 1850. So even though their Western style architecture was popping up all around it, the hale pili still had a very important role in everyday life. And so it thus must be represented on our site to show a more accurate picture of what life would have been like. This particular hale was designed with the Reverend William and Clarissa Richards, extensive descriptions in their archival documentation of their own hale pili, which did stand on the grounds in 1823. We encourage we encourage all of you to come down to Hawaiian mission houses to come and enjoy the new building and take a look and get that sensibility of what it would have been like to congregate in a hale like this, or to live your daily life. While the building design and placement is rooted in our archival evidence, the plans to present the building in our educational programs, our aim is to reflect the hands of the builders, because we were blessed to see Kumukava'a and Kawikawa with the OPO of Kawaiaha, and even a few visiting school groups where we were able to see them in action for a large part of 2 years. So we have all of these concepts that they have graciously allowed us to carry forward through the teaching of this building. And we will also have them help us workshop our new curriculum to give feedback to make sure that all of the appropriate concepts, all of the good vocabulary in Olelo Hawaii, and are all in place for the school programming, so that there's that greater access to these concepts that they have built into this building. The addition of the hale brings a new context to the 1821 frame house, which is in its bicentennial year. So it was the 1821 frame house, which is was a prefabricated Western style house that was imported in the end of 1820 and was constructed over the year of 1821 and finished around August of 1821. This early depiction of the site shows the two as they shows the compound as it would have looked with hale pili and with the newly constructed 1821 frame house in that early arrival period. This sketch is from 1823. And I've included a quote here about the arrival and the construction of the house, so that to give a little bit more context to the construction of the house. But it's very interesting to see. This is what the preservation architect Spencer Lineweber used as evidence that the halepili that we have reconstructed would have had doors and windows, which wouldn't have been a typical feature in other contemporary hale of the 19th century. I'll leave with one quote that shows a bit of a ideological shift, I feel, in this early period of the ali'i upon seeing the utilization of the 1821 frame house by the missionaries, the use of architecture and for spreading the word of Christianity was starting to come into the ali'i ideology. I find this particularly interesting, which is a quote from the Sandwich Island Mission Journal from May of 1821. So the house was almost finished. A visit from the king and some others of the royal family. We told him that we should always be friends of the king and his people, and that our only object was to do him and his people good. He is much pleased with our house and wishes to send to America to get him 3 stories. He intends, he says, to worship Jehovah and wants 1 story to be appropriated to that object. We hope that our friends and patrons feel disposed to furnish such a habitation for the king and for the mission. He seems desirous for such a place for the worship of God. So as the community changed rapidly in this early contact period between the missionaries and the Hawaiian community, it's particularly important to have this side-by-side comparison of the artifacts of architecture, the halepili and the Western style 1821 frame house. This comparison then becomes this avenue for a multitude of perspectives and inquiries and traditional Hawaiian concepts and the newly introduced Western architectural concepts. From humanities, history, from STEAM to culture and art and design. And I'll hand it off to Elizabeth to talk a little bit about how our curriculum starts to access those from a kindergarten through a college level. These concepts can represent a time of critical change in Hawaii, and I know that the executive team and myself are very pleased with how the site is representing these representing this time, and I think that the entire community can benefit from knowing these things more deeply. So I'll hand it off to Elizabeth to talk about how we are bringing this forward.
Great, thank you, Beth. And aloha kako, I am Elizabeth Lentz-Hill. I am the other Elizabeth on the executive team. I am a missionary descendant from missionaries from New England. And so while we are talking about primarily the programming and physical site and how that narrative has changed and shifted, I think our collaborative leadership also is kind of mirroring that and enabling a lot of this shifting interpretation also. So grateful to be here with you all today. As Beth said, you've already heard about how we've changed our tours and expanded our tours, how we've expanded our physical site to incorporate more narratives in here. And so, but now how are we taking it to the next generation? How are we taking this to our keiki so that we can shape our world moving forward from there? This idea of Hawaiian mission houses expanding its narrative and many historic sites doing so coincides with a trend in social studies teaching to look at new frameworks for how to do the standards and how to deliver curriculum to best foster inquiry in the students. So Beth, if we can go to the next slide. As Lisa mentioned, we were able in this past year during our shutdown time to apply for grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we're funded through grants through their CARES program to examine our curriculum, to revamp it so that we weren't just taking what we were already doing and putting it virtually during COVID times, but we were actually able to make the curriculum stronger, more inclusive, and a broader narrative, as we said. We were able to engage Dr. Amber Strong Makayao, who is a curriculum curriculum specialist at University of Hawaii Manoa, as well as at Honolulu, to really lead us in this curriculum revamp. And then, as Beth mentioned, we are able to reflect the hands of the builders. I thought that was a beautiful way to put it, Beth, where once we now have curriculum developed, we are taking it back to people who have the great vested interest and the great vested knowledge, such as Kumu Earl and Kumu Dwight pictured here, and getting them to give feedback to us and make sure that what we're saying and how we're approaching it is true and done from a good perspective. Beth, we can go to the next slide, please. So about 10 years ago, the social studies teachers nationwide began to re-examine the standards framework, as I mentioned before, and they have developed what's called the C3 framework, the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies Standards. And Dimension 1 is developing questions and planning inquiries. So before students even start to learn facts or anything like that, the most important thing that these teachers were saying was, let's make sure that they learn how to question. From there, there's ability to apply this to disciplinary tools and concepts. There are dimensions, Dimension 3 is evaluating sources and using evidence, and then communicating conclusions and taking informed action so that the students then be able to move into the world and share their information with others. So this was the framework that our new curriculum revision went through. And Beth, we can go to the next slide. And the delivery method for these new frameworks is called the inquiry design model. And this is a shift in curriculum methodology that social studies teachers and history teachers will be going to in the next few years here. So we're kind of trying to get ahead of the curve with this and making it as easy as possible for our educators to engage with Hawaiian mission houses in the way that they need to, that they'll be expected to in the future. But so the main starting place in historical inquiry in the C3 framework and the IDM, the inquiry design model, is the compelling question. So you get the students hooked by asking them a question they really want to answer about this site. Then we go through and we use sub-questions to answer that. We take them through activities of learning about, this is where we get into some more of the facts and things. We introduce them to sources, and we are lucky at mission houses to have so many primary sources to be able to draw on. We're able to talk with the students about what a primary source is versus a secondary source. How do we evaluate the effectiveness of something, of information that we're relying on for this? Then the students have kind of a summative assessment time, figuring out, making sure they've learned what they were expected to learn or hoped that we would learn. And then, as I mentioned, that taking action, taking an informed action and moving out into the world with it, whether that's writing a letter to a senator, talking to their tutu or grandpa about what they learned, building something along those lines, but an action that they take. Beth, we can go to the next slide, please. So just an example of compelling questions in general. Where are we? Why do countries need each other? These are some of the things that sometimes might seem basic, but in an education setting, these are really important questions. How can humans address their negative impact on the environment? And I love this one. Why can't we ever get everything we need and want, right? So Beth, we can go to the next one, please. Oh, and I'd like to say a thank you to Dr. Strong Makayao for the last 3 slides. I appreciate her letting us use those. So now we have some compelling questions from the Hale Pili. For example, one might be, how does our environment affect how we live? Or we could approach the students with the question, how can we use limited resources sustainably? Because as we'll find out and kind of touch on in just a moment, those sustainable processes were necessary in building the Hale Pili. And then another one might be, how does what we live in affect the way we live? All right, Beth, we can go to the next one. Thank you. So through this, we can introduce the students to vocabulary that relates both to architecture and to history and to contemporary times. Sustainability, environment are key things right now. We can go to the next one, Beth. We can draw on primary sources. This is a picture from our archives of Hale. So students can look at this as an actual artifact from the time. Beth, we can go to the next. Then we can place that primary source in comparison with what we have going on in a contemporary society today and have compare contrast times with this. We can go to the next, Beth. We can introduce materials that were used in building here. You can go ahead. So for example, the 4 kinds of woods that were typically used in Hale building. Beth, we can go to the next one here. Ours is ohia wood. And so you can see the strength and the kind of reddish hue there. Beth, we can go to the next. We can talk about the types of materials that were used for the thatching. And ours, as Beth mentioned, we can go to the next, thank you, Beth, is a hale pili made with, as Beth mentioned, synthetic pili that is fire retardant, which at age appropriate levels also gets us into ideas of historic preservation, why it's necessary to have the fire retardant hale pili as opposed to using a fully natural product material right now when it's so close to another historic building and in the center of such a cosmopolitan area. We can go to the next one, please, Beth. And we can also talk about materials that were used to make the lashings and bring up with students, hey, so how do you make the rope to hold something together if you can't just run down to City Mill and grab rope or nails or a glue gun or something like that? And so then this also leads into topics of sustainability. We have to take care of the land, we have to take care of our home and our environment in order to be able to keep having the supplies to keep building, to keep growing our society and culture. So all of these dovetail and are fostered by these questions of those compelling questions. Beth, we can continue on, please. We discuss the different kinds of hale. Ours is a hale noa or a hale without kapu, also known as a hale mo'i or a hale for sleeping. And side by side is that picture again of a similar hale from its original times. We can go to the next one, Beth. We also teach about the names of the different poles and standards that were used in the frames of the hale and what they all mean and are. And so we are incorporating this part, literally the structures and foundations in teaching them in Olelo, Hawaii, teaching them about Hawaiian culture, and then also having them in comparison and contrast to the 1820 house next to it. We can go to the next one, Beth. We can also incorporate measurements. How do you measure? How did Native Hawaiians measure throughout this whole process? And we can go to the next. Thank you, Beth. So we can talk about how Native Hawaiians used their own bodies in measuring, as opposed to rulers or measuring sticks or measuring tapes or things like that, which then also leads into conversation about how each hale pili is unique because it was made to that builder's unique measurements. So then we can engage in topics of craftsmanship and who is building and how do they build, but what community helps with the building, things like this. All right, Beth, we can go to the next one. And so this is just getting to be one of my favorite pictures now that the hale pili is done, but to have this current replication of a very historic building in the hale pili sitting next to the oldest Western style house in Hawaii, which at that time was a newer style of architecture, to have these two sitting next to each other allows for great compare contrast, allows for great imagination and exploration of all of the people who would have walked between these buildings, walked in these buildings, shared their stories, shared their foods, shared their work, everything along those lines. It's just really gratifying to be able to share this with the keiki and our adult tours as well. Beth, we can go to the next one. So that's a sample of how we are using the hale pili curriculum to expand our narrative. Wanted to share with you some of the other topics that we cover, which through this new inquiry design model with our curriculum. And so we use Hawaiian mission houses and our site and our artifacts to engage questions and these themes. And because we are engaging through questioning, it invites more people's perspective. It invites more engagement with how we are moving forward of learning with these facts and things. So for each of the themes, I've given a sample compelling question. So a theme of community and citizenship. Why do we need rules? It's a great question for a kindergartner and sometimes even a college student. The theme of cultural contact and adaptation, themes of economics, historical literacy, migration and exploration. Why do people migrate? That's a great question all the way around, and we've got a set of information that we can help share, help students engage with. And then people in the environment, which is where the hale pili curriculum really falls in there. We can go to the next, Beth. So in addition to trying to expand our curriculum and expand the narratives of it, we are also trying to vary our delivery methods so that we can meet as many students, as many educators, as many parents who are now homeschooling as possible with their needs to get them to engage with history at Hawaiian mission houses. So as Lisa said, we are very happy now to be offering field trips entirely in Olelo, Hawaii, or partly in Olelo, Hawaii, which also has opened us up to immersion schools, which is really exciting. Many of you hopefully know about our history theater program. If you don't, it's one of our signature programs where we take primary source material from our archives or other sister archives and bring people who are important in Hawaii's history to life based on their own words. So we portray their life in a 15 to 20 minute long monologue through their own words. And so we are using history theater because it allows people to engage artistic experiences, hit people in a different way, and allow our students to engage with history in a different way. And we also strive to have a very varied repertoire of the people who are represented in Hawaii's history. So we've got about 52 portrayals there. And some of these also have the inquiry design model curriculum that go along with them. Then we, as I think both Lisa and Beth have mentioned, we have been offering virtual field trips, of course, during this COVID time. We have welcomed some HPU students back on site now as well. And so we are looking forward, hopefully, as we all begin to hopefully venture out and we can welcome more students and folks to our site in person. We want to keep the virtual aspect because we have also been able to offer our tours to schools on Hawaii Island, on Maui. We had one in Japan just last week. We hope to reach out to the continent. It's just really, it's exciting to be able to share our work through this virtual format. So that will definitely be something that stays with us no matter what the future holds for all of us in terms of recovery from COVID. And of course, our programs are differentiated by age so that kindergarteners or college students can engage with our sites and our stories in ways that are appropriate for their learning level. I've put a screenshot on this slide of our Education Resource Center where anyone can go and learn more about our curriculum, learn more about tours and field trips, as well as our history theater program. You can get to it through going to missionhouses.org and then clicking on school programs, and it will link you to this. It's a really great resource. And if you are interested more about our continuing development on our curriculum, please keep checking back on this in the next few months too, as we continue to update that site as well. But it's really comprehensive right now, and we just look forward to expanding it more. So Beth, we can go to the next slide. I think on behalf of Beth and Lisa and I, we just want to say thank you so much for letting us come and share this with you. Our goal is to have as many people see themselves in the history of our site, to have as many keiki know that their story is included here too, and to invite people to come and ask questions and see what is here. If there was ever a perception that Hawaiian Mission Houses was telling a story from one side, we are actively working to expand what is being said and how the stories are, just by putting the stories out there and saying, here are all of the different people who intersected, who walked through these halls. And I think Beth and Lisa and I feel very grateful to be stewards of that process right now, and hopefully are getting as many people engaged as possible through as many stories as possible. We can go to the next slide, Beth. Just the details. We hope you'll come join us. You can always find out information on tours or make research appointments through our website, which is missionhouses.org. And you can also, we've got an extensive digital archives collection. We encourage everyone to check it out and see what is there. The resources there are free. And so that is part of expanding our narrative, is making sure that everybody knows all the resources that are available to everyone here. So on behalf of the three of us, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ralph, for engaging this program and allowing us to come and share our story with you all.
Thank you, Lisa, Beth, and Elizabeth. All I can say is, wow, it really blew me away. You're doing such wonderful work. And I think, Beth, if you want to close the PowerPoint, and Lisa and Beth, you can put on your cameras and join us. Let me just make that into gallery view. We'll address some questions. I also just want to congratulate Hawaiian Mission Houses. Again, They received an HHF Preservation Award for the Halepili. I think it was in 2020. Is that correct? And just want to congratulate you on that, and just a tremendous shift in the way stories are shared and history shared. Lisa, are you available to join us as well?
Yeah, I can't turn on my video. It says I am unable to start the video.
Oh, okay, let's see. In the meantime, I'll take care of that. I'll add you. Okay, I think I may have accidentally turned it off. We had a question from Phil as to what you're doing to educate teachers. You've shared so much about the wonderful educational program you're doing for students and the unique curriculum.
I think, oh, Beth,
any of you can respond to that. That would be great.
You can go first. I'll follow up.
Every year that since I've been working here, we reach out to teachers and we have offered a workshop. In other words, we like to be able to show the teachers how a tour would work and how they can facilitate it within their curriculum and their syllabi. And so this is no different when we reach out to different schools. Sometimes it's a year in advance, and especially with the higher level of schools like high school and junior high, they like to see what the curriculum is, and so they can insert it into their syllabi. So we work with them individually and offer workshops.
Great. Just moving along to another related question. What has the reaction been to this new curriculum? I'm really curious as to know, like, how are the students feeling about this? It seems so engaging. I can't imagine it's not wonderful, but what have you noticed? And it's for anyone. I don't have a specific person to direct that to.
Beth, do you want to jump on that one first?
Sure. Just in working with Amber Strong-Makayao, who has been helping us convert the curriculum, I think that the students being led to question-based content it helps them navigate their world in terms of finding their own resources. And so you see them having more creative results as a result of that process. So it's they come up with things, of course, that lets their mind really be free. And I think that is a beautiful piece of converting the curriculum to this.
All of the teachers, our staff has said that the conversations are more engaging. Mm-hmm. The idea that we are striving for is that to be able to engage with the student, you have to make it relevant. So for instance, if you look at the portraits here as a way the missionaries used them, because the children used to go back to New England for school, it was to remember somebody. But if you can then talk to the students about how do you use pictures and portraits, it's through their phone to talk to each other. So there is a connection of how a different device is used, or a platform, or an object is used. So it's really exciting, and I do want to mention that Hawaiian Mission House is on the forefront of this, that we are implementing a curriculum that is not yet widely used in Hawaii, but will be used and required by the DOE. So we're already prepared and ready for when the DOE has implemented it. Our curriculum will match their curriculum. And so, we have been able to serve Hawaii Island, Maui, and Japan. And again, we've never been able to offer field trips to schools on outer islands. For that curriculum is just as relevant on their islands as it was here, as the missionary stations were on every island.
Thank you, Lisa. Beth, do the continuing translations of the Hawaiian language newspapers continue to add and enhance the stories and the interpretations that you're sharing?
Is continuing to have more access to translation enhancing our curriculum? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So we, as I tried to fit into my piece of the presentation, everything we do is rooted in our archival evidence, the archives that we have and the archives that are accessible via the internet and other archives here in Hawaii. And so certainly projects like translating the newspapers inform our curriculum. And you can see in the structure, the additional resources that is built into the curriculum is all primary sources. So when a teacher gets the curriculum from us, they will have a pre-filled, curated format that has all of those primary resources, some of them being the translated newspapers, some of them resources that are not translated but maybe transcribed, like the project that we're working on in our archives that actually seeks to contain the language as it was written and as it so that the immersion schools don't need to go back and forth to an English resource and back to a Hawaiian resource. They can just stick with a Hawaiian resource and have that transcription there. So certainly all of these archival accessibility projects inform this curriculum.
So the field trip is taken in the language of instruction. Mm-hmm. All the way across. And so I also want to mention that one of the interesting things now that we are finding is that the letters are hard to read because students across the board are not being taught cursive because they're very tech savvy. And so that is another aspect that we get to address. So I just wanted to address, Philip asked, what do we say to the student when the question is asked, where do they leave their surfboards? Which is really kind of interesting because the story that I was talking about with Reverend Green, it was mentioned in there that the reason why they didn't stay to work on the loom is because he was having them work at the hottest time of the day, which didn't make sense to anybody but to the missionaries, and they would go off surfing. And so we do address games and different ways that students pass time. And one of them was surfing, which was one of Ka'ahumanu's favorite pastimes was surfing. And so they didn't leave their surfboards anywhere. They went surfing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think I wanted to just pose another question about, it seems like this curriculum and the themes that you're discussing are so universal and they're so relevant to our times. And I'm wondering, I guess that was, I don't know if it's even a question or just your thoughts on that, on the sharing, on both the way that you're bringing together these really, what were previously separate and different narratives and a deeper understanding of how the influence one upon the other was really important, but yet doing it in ways that are very relevant to and respectful of each of those cultures. So can you say something about how that is important for this time and other ways that you might be sharing this that can help catalyze that in other places, other islands, our islands, other islands in the mainland?
I'd like to jump on that
Sure.
because I have this strong feeling, I think we all do, that history makes no difference if we're not moving forward, if it's not informing our contemporary context. So everything that we are doing, all of these shifts in curriculum, these shifts in perspectives, these trying to bring as many people to our site. Our site has been a community site for 200 years plus, right? Just even the 200 since the New England missionaries were welcomed here, but obviously so many more years beforehand through the Native Hawaiians and all too. So everything that we are trying to do is in order to inform our contemporary society, I think particularly the keiki, who will then create our next society and how we are moving forward from there. And I think through all the shifts that we've seen, particularly in the last year, across the nation in so many different topics, that we are right in there and that we are not afraid, as Beth said, to address some hard topics and really just trying to do it from this idea that if we can all talk, if we can all learn and engage, acknowledge who we were then, who the people were that intersected then, and then what did we like about that? What don't we like about that? What are we moving forward to? I really just feel like it is, it's our calling. We must do it. We're compelled to do it. There's no other way to be in a historical field or maintain a historical site without also acknowledging what we are doing now. So I feel very passionately about that, as you can tell. That's why I just wanted to jump in. It bears repeating, I think, and particularly with sites that have a long history like ours. Lisa, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to also acknowledge the fact that with the growing community of Olelo Hawaii speakers, we are serving the Olelo Hawaii speakers, but as well as being able to open up those stories that were for the longest time ignored because nobody could access them on a deep level. And I think it is our responsibility to acknowledge what was written in Olelo Hawaii, which expands the narrative. And so I want to assert, because some people say, oh, it hasn't been a problem. We're not giving our opinion about the time or the place. We're opening up our archives and presenting the archives, the transcriptions, and that's what our job is to do, is to make these things available, make it available to our community. And it goes back to the larger questions. How do you build community? And regardless of anybody's viewpoint, mine being from the Lahui, is that I know that my ancestors were building a community with these new people that had come, and together they were building something that we still are benefiting from today, both positive and negative, and we're still navigating through it, just as they were back in the 1800s.
Well, Beth, did you want to add anything?
So just as you know, from a curatorial background, I think for museum folks, it's a fascinating approach because it's really putting the questions back into the hands of the people. You know, so we're not seeking to interpret, but really to invite you to help us interpret, and that is the mission of the museum, I think, and how it's going to stay relevant today.
I just want to thank Elizabeth, Beth, Lisa, I want to thank all of you. This has been just so inspirational for me personally, and I believe for our audience too, judging from some of the comments. The model's amazing. This whole new way is just incredible. I want to thank you for your time today and for sharing this mana'o. I also want to thank everyone who's still on the call for joining us. And I want to thank my colleague, Michelle Kisek, who's been providing technical support. And most importantly, thank Dr. Ralph Kam, but for his curation, because this is the series, this wonderful series has emerged out of his work and vision for this year. I also want to invite everyone to sign up if they haven't yet and they're interested in these topics, to sign up for the HHF e-newsletter at historichawaii.org. And just to let you know, we are also having our next event, which is actually preservation seminar on Wednesday, March 24th. It's on the standards and guidelines for the treatment of historic properties. And it's part of our preservation and practice training for members of the public, private or government sectors who own, manage, steward, or are interested in preserving historic and cultural sites. And these seminars, we've been doing them. We used to do them in person and actually travel, of course, pre-COVID, which we'll do again, hopefully, in the not too distant future. But now we're doing them digitally. So it's been a shift as well. And we do them in partnership with the National Park Service and the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. And finally, I just want to put a call out. If you've been enjoying this series, if you're not yet a member of HHF, if you haven't donated, if you can, of course, it's always dependent on your capacity, please consider supporting the work that we're doing. We're thrilled to share all these wonderful visionaries and projects with you. And the more support we can garner, the more we can continue to do that. And finally, I just want to wish everyone, again, to you and your loved ones, much aloha, wishes for good health, great spirits, and hope to see you again very soon. Ohui ho. Bye, everyone.